So, okay. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're scheduled to last till about 11 o'clock, so an hour and a half. As I say, if you do have any queries or questions, we're happy to take them via the comments box, and we will take you through. My machine works. Through. Okay. So, one of the things that we found is that with all the changes that have happened in the last 18 months, the world is a different place to where it was. And we are familiar with DISC. We've used DISC, as you know, that our experience with DISC, but we're not quite sure whether DISC will actually work moving forward as well as it has done in the past, because we're just in such a different world with remote working, with people working from home, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The marketplace and the world has changed over the last 18 months because of what we've experienced. And for those of you that are familiar with DISC profiling, DISC really only scratches the surface. It's only looking at how your behavior at work is being affected at the moment and your preferences. What we'd like to talk to you about today is values. And values go a lot deeper. Values are embedded into your DNA in terms of what really drives and motivates you to be the person that you are. So we're really hoping that will work in a lot more effective way moving forward. The session this morning, we're going to look at values and their potential impact. We're going to cover a number of areas. We're going to have quite a good debate around what they actually are, where do they come from, how they create the culture, what impact they have on communication and collaboration with others. So as individuals, we have certain values. How do we match those together when we work as a team? And how do we match those even further together when we look at a corporation and a business? Do they actually motivate and engage people, or can they actually potentially demotivate people if you've got discord between the values and beliefs of an individual and the values and beliefs of an organization? So how do they actually align and match together? We then need to know how we can identify them, how we can align them, and then all together, if we work in collaboration and working as a partnership, then we will engage the business, and from a result of that, performance will increase. So that's what we're going to cover today. As I say, aim to finish around 11 a.m. Without any further ado, I will hand over to Phil, and Phil is going to take you through some of the next few slides. Phil, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, thank you. Right, just moving on then from that opening slide, good morning to you again, and lovely to see you. I haven't got any personal clients on the list today, so I thought maybe just a few points about myself so you know where I sit in the business. Basically, my career started with psychometrics just very quickly, by using the instrument in an HR capacity, so to recruit and train in the airline business, where people predominantly make the difference between good service and bad service. And I brought psychometrics in. It was a DISC profile, and it helped us to understand people better and use it appropriately to recruit, train, and develop them and manage them. Since then, I've moved on, and I've spent the rest of my life, which has been a big chunk of that 90, 100 years that Paul mentioned, training people and accrediting people. So I'm BPS trained, and I've spent a lot of time with emotional intelligence and DISC and cognition. That's understanding how people think and how quickly they learn. Can you, I'm getting a message to say that I can't be heard.
I can hear hear you fine myself.
Thank you very much. Just I'm unmuted, but I got a message come through. So thank you for clarifying that, Sarah. Okay. So one thing that was always missing for me as a trainer of DISC was with regards to looking at the difference between people who got the same profile. So lots of times people would have the same profile, the same emotional intelligence results, even the same cognitive results if they completed a cognitive test, and yet they would challenge it in the training room quite rightly and saying, but I'm not the same as the person next to me who appears to have the same profile. And that was always an interesting thing, and we used to answer that that was an emotional intelligence factor. But actually it's deeper than that. It is in fact with regards to the values the person held that deliver that behaviour. So to go on from what Paul has said, I discovered that values are deep-seated needs, the deep-seated needs of an organisation and also the people that work in that organisation. And they can be realistic and they can be unrealistic. They also represent the standards that we set for ourselves and that a business sets for itself and its people. So in some respects, some of the work I did, the organisation had set them too high, or people had set their own standards too high, or conversely, the other way around. Now, I know from my perspective, I set mine far too high. So that's a challenge I have to live with. Values in the workplace also deliver behaviours and perceptions which can be useful in some cases and unuseful in others. That can lead us to have judgment on ourselves and on other people. So those judgments could be accurate or they could be skewed. And they're not coming from observable behaviour, they're coming from the way the person thinks and the way they are. So the values for our rule are basically our rules for living. They're also the bedrock of a business culture. And some businesses are successful beside themselves or despite themselves, as we say, because they just happen to have a really good product and it's gone to market and sold, and we've suddenly developed this success and now need people to help us maintain that success. The values come from the top down in our culture and set the expected standards for behaviour. It gives people a framework with which to work. So they're the internal drivers of motivation and behaviour. I like to call them the energizers and firing pins of behaviour. So those are the things for me that make sense, because a business is about energy. It's about whether the energy is moving in a positive way or a negative way. And the people who provide that energy are the people that we employ. So that energy needs to align to the organisational values. And where they do, people are likely to enjoy being at work and performing more consistently. So when we do studies on, how you feel at work or exit interviews, a lot of people don't leave the business per se, they leave the culture, or they leave the manager who has set the culture for a particular team. So values in themselves are an important predictor of job satisfaction and accountability. And people can stay with us, but actually not be with us psychologically. Depends whether they're able to move on. So being physically present doesn't necessarily mean the person enjoys being there. And it doesn't mean that they will say good things about the business when they're outside of it. So where do these values come from? I think this pyramid, or the iceberg pyramid concept, explains it quite nicely. We think of ourselves here, which is usually the best way, is how do we develop? So what do people see behaviourally in us and our attitude, and how do we deliver that? We see that externally, so we can see different behaviours and attitudes in different people, but we don't know where that comes from, because at the bottom of the iceberg, we have the build factor of values. So they start with nature and nurture, that continual argument about which comes first. Well, they come together. The culture that we're in determines the beliefs that we might have. Those beliefs might be given to us by religion, by our ethnicity, by people that have educated us and taken us forward through our education process and our parents. and also through environmental experiences. So what is the environment like that we were born into, and where does that come from? Where are the experiences in our life? Were they good ones? Were they bad ones? And how have they, if you like, primed our thinking? Our thinking is perceptual. So perceptions are the most powerful emotion inside an individual, because they determine our expectations. Our expectations of ourselves, what we think we should and shouldn't believe, how we should and shouldn't behave, what's right, what's wrong, and also our expectations of others. And then we get this matching process that starts to develop as to whether it's toxic or whether it's tonic. So the values are the reason why, and that was the question we always had in our training courses. We could measure what and how, so with regards to how someone behaves, but we couldn't necessarily get at the root of that. And that is, why are two people who are the same on the surface behaving differently when they interact with each other or a particular challenge or business? So if we have a look now at what happens to the individual at work. So values create culture, usually top down. In Japan, it's the other way around. So in Japan, it's customer first, and the pyramid, as we know it, is inverted. So the culture is created by the customer. And I work for British Caledonian. And that was interesting when we opened up our routes to Tokyo, because we found we had to completely change our cultural approach to the Japanese market. We had to completely turn it upside down and say, this is not a top down, this is a bottom up theory. If you look at where the culture is, it is at the bottom, driven by the customer. So here we have a situation, we've got the individual at work, we want them to enjoy it. So looking at the work they do to the left of the actual graph here, people go to work because they want to do well and they want to take pride in what they do and make a contribution. If we look across to they're going to be working with other people, so employees and co-workers. To do that, they need to build a sense of solidarity with their colleagues. They don't have to be friends with them, they just have to have this collaboration, which brings them fulfillment, well-being, ownership, and loyalty if the organization has a culture of trust. So we can trust people who we work for. They give us credit when we deserve it. They give us respect for what we do, and they treat us fairly. So that trust aspect is driven by management and the culture at the top. If the business has no organizational culture, then it is the person who owns it that sets that culture. And that drains down like a pyramid and like a waterfall into the business and has an impact at the bottom and on the bottom line. So it's very important that people at least match to the majority of the key cultural needs of the business. They don't have to be a complete match, because the strength of an organization comes in its differences. So it's good having people with different values in the organization, providing they acknowledge where they're similar and they can respect where they're different, and put those two things together. So what happens then if we move on to see when we get disconnect, or we get an alignment problem where the person's values do not match the organization or vice versa? Now, this can happen in a number of ways. The person could be in the right organization, but the wrong job. They could be in a team, but in the wrong part of a team. So doing the wrong role within that team. They could be in the right job, but in the wrong company. And people then tend to move on from that company to somewhere else. So the fulfillment aspect, if we have an alignment problem, the person doesn't get fulfillment and they don't take ownership on the job. So they do the job just because it needs doing. And when the chips are down, the responsibility of why it went wrong, sharing successes and failures, doesn't happen. The focus on the business, not on the work they do, is not there. Collaboration can be poor. Loyalty hits retention levels on the bottom line. Quality of work, one we're going to show you later on a case study if we get time today. It shows that where the quality of the work and the communication and well-being within the teams was actually misaligned. And that can cause stress and frustration in a business that we really don't want. If we look at another iceberg syndrome, it's called the iceberg of ignorance. Now, this is old information. It's from Yoshida research in 1989, and I'm sure the numbers have changed today. So I'm sure that those percentage figures basically may have shifted more towards the positive. A lot of the work that I've had the pleasure of doing has been looking at a problem in a business and what is the solution. Nearly 100% of the time, the staff at the front line know the answer to the problem. They know what the problem is. But looking up the percentages, because of the disconnect, if the communication in the business is not fluent, is not open, and is not transparent, it gets hidden from the senior managers at the top. And they're the decision makers. And that's where the mismatch occurs and the disconnect in an organization starts to take place. That's the thing we had to be careful of with British Caledonian, with dealing with the Japanese marketplace, is that we need, the customer was king, and that information had to flow back to the people making the decisions. So getting the right people moving on from here is really the challenge that, as Paul indicated, is the challenge for the future. And that is in a new paradigm where we really don't know what's ahead of us. We're looking at the possibility of working from home more. We're looking at disconnects in teams because of that. We're looking at how to manage people from a distance, as well as maybe looking at resources which are going to be different to the ones we had. Whatever we need to do, the people need to fit with the core values of the business. They need to embrace them and they need to live with them. People who do that don't require tight management. They just need clear understanding of what they have to do and their responsibilities. We're likely to get better levels of commitment, and these people are loyal. They're our best adverts for getting new people for the business and referring customers into us because they're passionate about the company and its work. So they display a maturity called window and mirror, that self-awareness, very self-aware, but also aware of what's going on around them and how to actually respond to that. So the bottom line is an old saying is companies don't succeed, people do. And we have to make sure that we do our very best to get the right people and then lead them forward. So motivation and engagement is really, really important. And if we look at the two types of motivation that we have to manage in an organization, so if we look forward now onto the next slide, please, we're looking at motivation or engagement, which is strongest? Well, a friend of mine, Richard Denny, said motivation once established doesn't last. Engagement does. So when we use a DISC profile, so bottom right of the slide shows you behavior and personality profiling, that measures extrinsic motivation. The person does it because they need to. The job description and the contract say so. So tangible rewards, achievement, promotion, money, incentives can be values in a business. Praise, recognition, popularity, avoidance of fears, working to please others, etc. Intrinsic motivation is where values sit, values and emotional intelligence, which starts the journey. So it's about standards, expectations, passion and enjoyment in the job, perceptions, emotions, most importantly, attitude and desire, and a curiosity to explore and make a contribution to the organization. That requires a different type of contract. So moving on to look at what type of contracts can we put in front of somebody. Well, obviously the employment contract has to be present, and those are the rules and regulations of employment. The new demand for the future is matching the individual and creating a psychological contract. So identifying the things which are right for us as a business and making sure we have the right people to do that, and their potential psychological fit to the business. Are they embracing the way we like to do things and how we do things? And our leaders making sure that that's taking place. Aligning the strengths and potential of the role, the team and the business to the right people so that they do deliver what it is they can and what we want them to. And most importantly, I think engaging them, onboarding them is so critical, I found. Not just sitting next to Ellie and saying, she'll show you how this is done, but really knowing where to go and how to get that person involved with the business so we can manage, develop and reward them appropriately. So values in the future, if we just finish up now and we'll pass back to Paul in a second to show you how we can actually measure this. We need to choose the ideal people. So can we move the slide on, please, Paul? Thank you. Choosing the ideal people for the company is very important. Ensure everyone understands and fits the best way they can into the organisation. And if they can't, provide the right coaching and development to help them. Help the managers to understand how to motivate and manage them effectively. Enrichment is what values brings to the business and to the assessment of people and to the delivery of performance. So engaging and retaining the skills and knowledge of people and their potential is really critical. We do not want these skills and knowledge going to our competitors. So it's about encouraging an ethos of willing self-development. We want the person to own their own direction and own their own performance, whether that needs improvement or whether it doesn't. And retention, as we know, if we lose people, it costs more money than it does to replace them. So that's a little bit of, I don't know how much of values you've been involved with in the past, but that's really the introduction to take you back to Paul. So thank you for listening. I hope you heard everything okay. And take you back to Paul, who's going to take you into how to measure values and how we can help you to do that.
Thank you, Phil. I should be back on speaker. Hope. Yes. Yeah, that was when I was younger. Thanks very much for that, Phil. Just as a sort of interlude, has anybody got any questions at this point? Anything that they'd like to ask Phil? If not, we will continue, but a question opportunity has arisen. No? Okay, we shall move on. So actually over to the system now. Within the InterACT system, there's two assessments that look specifically at values. The first looks at individuals, the personal values proposition, and it looks at individuals' values for them separately. The second, the corporate values, will either look at teams or actually the whole corporation or business. So over the last 20 odd years of working in this sort of environment, I've worked with loads of organizations that have these proposition and value proposition statements posted throughout the workplace. But one thing that sort of challenges them a little bit is you say, well, how do you actually measure them? And then that's when you get the silence. They have them created, they will have people come in and look at them, look at their culture, look at their business, look at how they work, or it's driven from somebody at the top that says, this is what I believe, therefore everybody that works for me believes the same thing. But it's quite a subjective area. So by asking a question, actually, how do you measure these? Then that's when we start to dig down a little bit. Now, for the first time in the UK, I think there is a way of measuring them. The assessments that we've now got within the InterACT portal, as far as I'm aware, are unique, definitely unique in the UK. And although I said at the beginning that they're new to us, they have been in circulation within Australia and South Africa for over 18 years. and they have a really good pedigree. The development of these two assessments are based on the work of people like Maslow, which you'll be familiar with, Hertzberg and McClelland. McClelland's three needs theory was a sort of fundamental point of how these two came together. So the assessments have really good pedigree. There will be a few people on this webinar today who have actually completed their personal values. So it'd be really interesting if they have any thoughts or feedback. Then when we get to the end, it'd be really interesting to hear what people thought in terms of actually completing the assessment. But for now, what we're going to have to do is look at the actual ones, and I'm going to share mine with you in a minute. So the personal values profile, it's a self-reporting questionnaire. So like a lot of people when they talk about psychometric tests, it's not a test, it is a questionnaire. Nobody gets it wrong, there's no right or wrong answers. And we look at 21 predefined work values. The 21 values are divided into 7 further subgroups. And corporate values is exactly the same, but whereas the personal values is looking at the individual, the corporate one is now looking at the values from the perspective of a job or a team or indeed the whole organisation. And the purpose of the exercise is to get an alignment with the individual and the rest of the business. Looking at this in more detail, we've got the 7 broader clusters on your left-hand side. They're also colour-coded, so as you read through the report, for those of you who have seen it, the colour coding becomes quite useful in terms of seeing where these clusters start to join together. But if I just take you through the 7 clusters, business ethics is one of my highest, and it's really relating to the need for the work that you do to be morally correct. And for those of you who know me, I think most of you on the screen do, that has actually meant in the past that I've left a job because I didn't believe I was in alignment with the morals of where the company was going and my own personal beliefs. So values can be really, really strong in determining how you work within a business. You then have physical health. And physical health looks at the demand, sorry, easy for me to say, put my teeth back in, the physical demands and challenges a person requires. Now, on my profile in a minute, you'll see that this is quite low for me in the working environment, but not so much outside of work. But physical activity, again, is sort of there in terms of importance to people. Lifestyle stability, the 3rd cluster. It's really looking at a person's cultural, financial, and artistic view of their environment. So there's those 3 sub-values that are sitting under lifestyle. One that's really, really important for me in terms of a major cluster is autonomy. It's relating to the need for the individual and their role for independence, their freedom of lifestyle, their variety at work, and their creativity. And for those of you who are familiar with DISC, you'll start to see how some of these values can be related to DISC facets, but not always. And that's like Phil was saying, you know, you can get 2 people with a very similar DISC profile, but they have different values. Therefore, they may well come across as different in the workplace. 4th one is need for growth. This is reflecting the value that put on their knowledge, either developing your own or sharing with others, and the sense of achievement that when you actually do achieve this knowledge and learning and continual growth. When I'm coaching people, when I'm working with clients, one of my favorite phrases, and I guess a lot of you on this call today will have come across it, is that every day is a school day. And I truly believe that, you know, you learn something every single day, or one of the intentions should be that we try and learn something every single day. It's so important. I actually book an hour in my diary every day for personal development. I'll either go and read a book, I'll do something, I'll research something, I'll go on the internet and look at what's happening. And it may or may not ever be used, but it just sits there, and I know it's there in the background, and I can refer to it if it need be. Next, we have interaction, value derived from being with others through recognition, support and accomplishment. Again, very close links to people with influence in terms of DISC and the I factor, but it goes a lot deeper than that. Again, for people that know me, I am a pure D profile. I'm pure dominance. I don't have I in my profile. But during lockdown, and we've said over the last 18 months how things have changed, I've really struggled working from home 7 days a week. I've worked from home for years, but not every day, not being able to get out, not being able to interact with people. So even from a pure D perspective, the need for that interaction and the need to just know that there are other people there, recognizing what you do, recognizing what you're achieving is important. And it is a motivator, and it is a value that people have, whether they're an I profile or not. And the final factor in terms of the larger clusters, the pink one, is around entrepreneurial style. And this relates more to how people perceive their financial reward, how people perceive their exposure to risk. Again, when you look at my slides in a second, you'll find that that entrepreneurial factor is there. And if I look at my career over the last 35 plus years, it starts to show how there becomes a pattern in terms of where you are and what you are. When I first went to join Thomas International some 19 years ago, it was because one of the statements that were made at the interview is, although you're employed, you can run your business as if it was your own. And that was a really, really big pull for me, that I could do something with the support of a large organization, but I could do it my way. And that was a key driver for me. Therefore, when that changed, in terms of where my perception was, my perceptions changed, and the alignment got a little bit out of skew. So we'll move on. Here is my actual wheel. Can everybody see that okay? Just a thumbs up, but hopefully it's large enough on the screen. The way the model works, it divides it into 3 broad categories. And it looks initially at 7 major motivators for me. And if I just use the cursor, you'll see that around here, for those of you who know me, probably won't come as a surprise, but financial rewards is my highest value. I need to know that if I work hard, and I am again a believer in terms of work hard, play hard, but working hard gives me the financial rewards, not just from a sort of selfish point of view, but allows me to enable my children to go to the schools I want them to go to, enables us to go on holidays to where I want to go to and where the family wants to go to, enables us to live in a nice part of the world. So the financial rewards for me and the values I put on that, although may look initially on the surface as quite a selfish value in terms of I'm just out to earn a lot of money, it's actually the value for me is what that money enables me to do, which is really, really important. So the highest is financial rewards. We then have business ethics, and I've mentioned already, I actually have left jobs in the past because of the disalignment between what my personal values are in terms of my morals and where the company is heading. And when you get that disconnect, then you have a choice, I guess. And again, mine was to take a different avenue. So you see those 2 up at the top, they're 2 of the highest. We then move down towards here at the bottom, and I mentioned the larger cluster around autonomy. There's 2 of my major motivators, major values here around freedom and lifestyle and independence. They are very important to me, but equally you'll see that the other ones in this yellow sector around variety, creativity, and authority are all equally quite high. So these are classed as minor motivators, but the cluster as a whole, the yellow area as a whole, is very significant in terms of what drives me and where I need that alignment for work. So the cluster of autonomy, like I mentioned before, is really important. We then look at the next two, and that's personal development and ability utilization. And again, if you look at the third one in terms of need for growth, achievement, all three of those, again, are quite high. So my key values around this bottom segment of the wheel. In terms of need for growth, personal development, we've already talked about every day is a school day, but equally, you know, ability utilization. That fundamentally for me is key. And when I set up my own business a couple of years ago, and for those of you who are familiar with Simon Sinek, he's on YouTube nearly every day, he's on LinkedIn nearly every day doing different bits and pieces. But Simon Sinek talks about the why. And for me, ability utilization is my why. It's using 30 odd years of experience and knowledge of small businesses and large businesses, and the knowledge I've gained in terms of the psychometric world to enable other people to be better at what they do, to improve their performance, to improve their self-awareness, to improve their leadership and management skills. And that really gives me a buzz. You know, I had some conversations yesterday with a client, and when we came off the call, I was absolutely buzzing, but I'd done nothing. The buzz came from the fact that the individual I'd been talking to said, "Oh, I see it now. I understand that. Great, thank you very much. I can now do X, Y, and Z." And that's really where ability utilization comes into its own, that you're giving other people your experience and knowledge to help them. So these two clusters around this bottom end, as I said, really, really important. Although I am a high D and I do have a lot of dominance, I can get a little bit grumpy, I guess, at times. There is that interaction requirement there. There is the concern for others. And, you know, concern for others links with ability. You know, if I want people to perform, I can only do that if I have a genuine belief and an empathy with what they are wanting to achieve. So very much bottom left and up to the side is me and my part. When we look at the other side, so we've looked at the major factors, the ones with the dots. We've looked at the minor motivators, the ones that are just there in the different colors. And then you'll see that there's also the potential demotivators. And the model splits them into three nice groups of 7. So 21 overall, 3 groups of 7. And you'll see now, if we look at this orange sector here around lifestyle stability, we've got things like artistic appreciation, not a strength of mine. I'll openly admit that. But what was really, really interesting, when I started my business a couple of years ago, I went to do some presentations. We did some webinars, and well, they weren't webinars because we could actually in those days do it face to face. We did seminars. Gosh, that's a word I haven't used for a long time. We actually had a seminar. We invited people into a room and they sat around a table. Brilliant. It was amazing. But what I found really fascinating was the lady who I was organising the event with had put little bags of goodie bags around the table. She'd written name cards for everybody. She had flowers in the room, bouquets and different things. The room looked amazing. And although, you know, in terms of appreciation, yes, it looked amazing, it had very little impact on me. What's fascinating since I've had the opportunity to use the values assessment is that lady has now completed her values assessment, and her major value, her highest value, is artistic appreciation. And I said, that's great. I said, now it makes me fully understand why, when I walked into that room, I thought, wow, this room looks amazing. I would never have done that. Never in a million years would it have entered my head. But for this lady, a key value for her was it needs to look right. We are similar profiles, but very, very different in terms of our value makeup. So around here, predictable environment, it isn't something that I need, but if it is, then it's important for others, not for me. Financial security, I work for myself, so You know, it's very much around if I don't work, I don't earn. And I have a fairly pragmatic approach to that element in terms of my lifestyle. And so around lifestyle stability, there's a significant number of potential demotivators. But this one I find quite important and an interesting area. So physical health, made up of physical activity and physical challenges. And in the work, you know, for those of you who know me again, I would never be a PT instructor. I haven't got the right shape or physique. I might have done 40 years ago, but not now. But physical activity for me outside of the workplace is really important. We walk the dogs 40, 50 miles every single week. It's really important for me to get that time out and about. I cycle quite a bit. Occasionally run if it's really nice weather and I feel like it, but I'm a fair weather runner. It has to be the right conditions. So although physical health and physical activity is important as a value for me outside of work, it wouldn't be inside of work. And where we're talking as a potential demotivator, if, for example, let me think of something, I had to work, well, I can take you back to my retail days. I'm going back about 30 years. And when I was in retailing, we managed an organisation of around 1,500 stores around the UK. And the senior management team had an idea that why don't we make all the middle managers and all the area managers work in a shop for a week and do a week in a shop so that they can see it from their team's point of view. That for me was one of the hardest weeks. One, you stood up for 7 hours a day on your feet. I'm not used to that. I'm used to sitting in a car. Two, when the stock arrived, you were shoveling boxes and humping boxes around and moving boxes around in the storeroom. It was a real tough gig. And you were absolutely shattered after doing 5 days in a store, in a busy store, because they always pick the busy ones. They never pick the quiet ones for you to go and spend a week in. And it would have been, in this sense, in terms of looking at my potential demotivators, if somebody said, rather than just doing a week, that's your job, I would have said, okay, I'm out in that sense, because it wouldn't have been something that I'd have wanted to entertain. Out of work, yes, I do like the physical exercise. In work, no. I'd rather be using these sort of areas around here. I'd rather be utilising my abilities and looking at personal development and achievement rather than physically manhandling stock around the store. So hopefully that's sort of put this into a little bit of context. For those of you who know me, hopefully you can see how it relates to who I am and to why I do what I do. But any questions, feel free to fire them at me and I'll try and answer them in the best way I can. The system has, so we've been talking about the wheel, the system also has it in bar chart format. And depending on your preferences, you can look at the wheel or you can look at the bar chart. And just as a point of reference, you'll see here that, you know, it's broken into 3 groups of 7, but my sense for achievement has an equal value and equal weighting to that of personal perception. So although we say there's 3 groups of 7, I would include that. So when I'm giving feedback to candidates and to people, I would say that I now have 8 motivators, major motivators, and then only 6 minor motivators. So I'd just divide it on the screen that way. So you can find people have 3 equal groups. You can find that sometimes we just merge these 2 together and say that there are 8 major motivators, depending on what the individual one looks like. Really, really important for me. And again, for those of you who are familiar with psychometrics, many of the assessments that we use will enable or have some way of identifying whether people have responded in an honest and open way. The final page of the values report is the fail-safe analysis. And what it's basically saying, what we're majorly looking for is this little button here and this S. So as long as we've got an S, it's saying that the results indicate that the report is safe to use. Okay, so we're looking for that S, and it will move. I've given feedback to people, and the S has been down here, the S has been up here, the S has been there. In an ideal world, you'd accept it slap bang in the middle, but it can move around. You can see mine's a little bit up to the top left. I found them in the bottom right. But as long as the S is there, then we're basically saying we're good to go. We can analyze the report and we can give the person feedback. However, occasionally the results get skewed. It may come across here and come into the L, which is where the candidates are obviously is showing a low scoring of the answers of the questions. In that case, we wouldn't pursue the reporting and would at some point ask them to repeat the questionnaire. Equally with overly high, if they've answered it so that the scores are expressed very, very high, then we would again not follow that up and do it. This one's an interesting one because I've had 2 or 3 already where their fail-safe indicator has come up here into the extreme zone. Now here we can give feedback, and I have given feedback, but it's really where they've expressed extreme answering in the way they've answered the questionnaire. So those of you who are familiar with TQ, we often or occasionally find a TQ wheel where everybody's got 99th percentile. They've answered it in an extreme way, and we just need to understand that and have the conversation. And as long as they're aware of it and they have that awareness, we can continue to run the feedback session. So E and S, anywhere around here, we can run the feedback. If they're extremely low or extremely high at these 2 ends of the spectrum, then we wouldn't run the feedback and we'd ask them to rescore. So far we've been talking about me as an individual. The other half of the system, though, is looking at a team or a company profile. And it uses the same 21 values, and it creates a wheel, and it identifies, in terms of the corporate's requirement, that how closely these clusters match with a job role or with the company culture. And it creates a wheel. You get the 7 major motivators, you get the 7 minor motivators, and you get the 7 potential demotivators. Remember, now we're talking about a job. So if we superimposed my personal values over the top of here, you'd see where need for growth is in accord. It's still there saying that's okay. But on the other side, these 2 factors around here, around the lifestyle stability, are to be in discord. So for this role, I would have to question how close a fit I am. Again, it shows you as a bar chart. And then the final part of the system is it will actually do a gap analysis, and it will match the individual to the job or the company. And it gives you here a little indicator in terms of the goodness of fit. So obviously the higher that number there, the stronger the fit between the individual and the job or the company. So that gives you a really good indication. A little bit for those of you who do DISC profiling, the job create allows you to analyze and compare and contrast how well that person fits. Hopefully that's been useful, actually seeing a live case. As I say, any queries or questions, then feel free to bob them on the chat and we'll try and answer them when we can. At this point, I'm going to hand back to Phil and have a little bit of a drink because my throat's sore. But yeah, so handing back to Phil and over to you.
Right, thank you, Paul. Very interesting there. Know a lot about you now. We've got a couple of case studies here, everyone, which the first one is basically a job values comparison where we're looking at 2 people who both work in emergency services But actually, if we look at the likely motivators, say the top three and maybe the bottom three that would apply to both, they would be very different. So we're going to invite you now to just maybe grab a pencil and a piece of paper and just jot down, looking at our firefighter on the left. And I'm not being sexist here, gentlemen, it's just I thought it would be useful to compare two ladies in the same job rather than the values of a man who's a firefighter and the values of a lady as a nurse, or the other way around, to see where the values would be common. So what would be the top three values, do you think, that the CVP, that's the job profile, not the person, would actually throw as a demand at the firefighter? So going through the list there that Paul's very clearly explained, what would be your top three? Now, we haven't preset the answer. This isn't one that we've done before, like the cake in the oven. So just have a think about it for a minute. We'll give you just a few seconds to write down what you think the top three would be, and maybe isolate the bottom three as well. The ones in the middle would be probably just normal minor motivators.
And if anyone's brave enough, bob it into the comments so we can see as it generates. That would be good.
And then at the same time, have a look at the nurse. That would vary according to the role of the nurse, whether it's A&E, whether it's caring for children, we'd accept that. But just in general terms, what would be the top and bottom three for that particular role, again, in the same emergency services industry? And if you're brave enough to come online and tell us, we'll be very pleased to hear from you. Sue Borman, thank you. Sorry, Sue Shawman, thank you, Sue. Can we highlight that? The top three, can we see that again? Woe the days of seminars when we can get back in the room and use the good old flip chart. Sarah Bradley, to both need physical health. Yes, they do. So the physical health side, the activity, the challenge, they will be different though, won't they? So one is going to be high on risk, which might bring in entrepreneurial at the bottom, and the other one probably would be looking to minimize risk. One's going to have to accept risk and walk into it, and the other one's going to try and avoid risk. Patrick, thank you. I missed that. It was off. It was there and gone, Patrick. I'm sorry. Physical, yes. So I guess you could ask which one, if you looked at autonomy, which one would probably require a degree of autonomy in the job? Bottom autonomy, okay. So we've got that. And lifestyle stability, particularly for the firefighter. Yeah, Malaine to everyone, the firefighter. Yeah, I agree with that. The autonomy's got to be more with the firefighter. Prestige, interaction, social interaction, concern for others. Where would that be placed, do you think? Yeah, to everyone. Nurse, definitely. Prestige sometimes comes from uniform, interestingly. I work with the police a lot, and a lot of people join the police because they get prestige and high self-esteem from being in uniform and having that visual impression. Yeah, thank you, Christine. Does business ethics appear anywhere? No. Entrepreneurial financial rewards. Well, they're both vocational, aren't they? So one would assume that although we'd argue they need well paying for what they do, wouldn't be a high motivator in the CVP. So that would be something that you could look at with regards to what Paul has said. Is a need for growth could be reason. Can't see the rest of the quote. I'm sorry, Sarah. We're only seeing a bit of the quote on our screens. I think the point of the exercise, and thank you for doing it, is you're engaging with it and beginning to look at the two jobs to see where they have similarities and where they would have specific differences, but they're both working in vocational roles, both providing an emergency service to the public. And that could happen. I guess the real question was, if you put the nurse into the firefighter's job and the firefighter into the nurse's job, what would happen there? Would there be a good match for both in a different role? What do you think? Probably not. Yeah. So that's what the CVP enables you to do. It enables you to challenge the job, and the CVP can apply to a specific job as well as to a team and as well as to an organization. So it's useful for companies of all sizes. You don't have to have a large corporate structure to do this. You can do this quite simply with a small business where it's fitting people to the role of a particular team or the actual work that they do. Okay, can we develop that a little bit more by looking at a live case study, which I've just finished actually, although the activity that came out of it is still continuing. This was it's a false company, I have to say that, so we're hiding the identity. Johnson's Finance was a family business. The parents who started it retired and passed it to the children, one of which was Helen, who's head of finance, as you can see from the organisational chart. And you're probably reading ahead of me, which is fine. Terry was a senior accountant and Gillian was a senior accountant, but in the growth of the business, both were promoted to supervisory level. And Helen and her brother, who's not on this screen, actually expanded the business to bring it up to 30 staff and deliver a wider range of accountancy services. The team of 30 was divided into a mixture of experienced accountants, and they also had a policy with local university to bring in graduate trainees who were studying for accountancy qualification. So a mixture of experience and inexperience there. Two experienced supervisors, Terry and Gillian, never really got on, but when we put them into the supervisory role, conflict emerged. Loss of communication. The team was starting to split into silo working cultures, resulted in an increase of errors and client complaints. Absenteeism has increased, and there's a noticeable reduction in the level of engagement and personal ownership. So when mistakes were being made, people started to blame each other or blame the system or the processes rather than look at the real reason why it's happened. The most talented team members, because they can, as we know in today's world, are starting to look for new employment, and that's got back to Helen. So she's decided to bring in some people to help her, one of which was myself. And this is what we did. So if we can just move on to see what actually happened. The first thing we did was to, for those of you that are DISC trained, and I apologize if you're not, I'll try and just sort of explain it a little bit if it's a new instrument to you. But DISC basically, going back to our iceberg, measures surface aspect behavior or patterned behavior. the pattern of someone's style when matched to 4-quadrant behavior: dominance, influence, steadiness, and compliance. So Terry, when he was profiled, was a very high S, high in steadiness, low in influence, low in dominance, and also had compliance just below the line. We'll have a look at that in a minute. The boss, Helen, had literally an inverted profile to Terry. So she was high in compliance, extremely high actually, which is rules, regulations. A little bit of dominance, which would emerge from now and then when things didn't go right. Not a people person according to the profile. Very low influence, so very reserved, reflective, realistic, and a touch skeptical maybe, and suspicious if she didn't have the facts. Below the line S, really not a very patient individual, wants lots of intellectual challenge and wants to do things quickly. So do them right, but do them quickly. When we looked at Gillian's profile, surprise, surprise, it was the same as Terry's, other than the influence factor was just on the center line, which we would rate as high influence, although not very strong currently. So when we look, the yellow shows where the people were different in style, in pattern style of observable external behavior, and the blue is where they indicated they had similarities. So we thought, well, that's helpful in some respects, because immediately you can think, well, maybe with low I, it's going to be a communication issue. But we thought we'd go deeper. So we moved on and we started to look at the values of each individual. Now, apologies for the amount of information. We know that you normally don't put much on a slide, but if we was in a seminar, we'd be handing this out to you and saying, look, spend a bit of time with it. If I can just explain it, the first person who went through the values exercise was the boss, because there was no CVP in existence. So there was no cultural values profile. They hadn't done anything like that. So Helen effectively is the culture of that team. If we look at her DISC profile above here, we can see, breaking it out, she was a perfectionist. If we look at the combinations of behavior, not the various elements, but we pull them together, she was someone that's good at problem solving and using her imagination. C over S, sensitivity, shrewd, but with a bit of tension, because there's a need to get things done quickly, but also not make mistakes. And an element of drive as well. She wanted things to happen and to happen fairly quickly. Her leadership style was rule enforcement, high C, and directiveness with the high D. So it's not indicating any people skills here. Communication style, very much telling and writing, which was the way she communicated with the team. In fact, they didn't have any meetings. She just sent them emails. Then we have the DISC indicated strengths underneath, which some of which were going to align to, or not align as it may be, to the actual PVP that she did. So indicated strengths: business ethics, quality, standards, and results. Her needs to be able to deliver that in environment would be realism, variety, challenge, and working to standard operating procedures. Potential limitations indicated by DISC would be people, relationships, communication, and empathy, so the soft interpersonal skills. The DISC motivators, this is the extrinsic motivators we alluded to earlier. Standard operating procedures, power, status and authority, which also includes prestige, and avoids conflict and failure by keeping control. When we looked at our values major motivators, the top three, there was a surprise: close relationships, concern for others, and, as expected, business ethics. Well, we'd normally expect to see that in the DISC profile with high I and high S. Wasn't there. If we looked at the demotivators, which was a surprise, 19 and 20 said financial rewards and prestige. both of which are indicators of needs for someone with the profile she had. When discussed with her, she said she takes that as a given. So in some instances, people will value things low on the, or lack, not very, very important on the PVP, because they expect it anyway. So it's one of the hygiene factors or maintenance factors, let's say, of Hertzberg. An artistic practice, well, that one was low and there was no place for it in the role. So we thought, let's have a look at the others and see how they compare. So we moved on quickly to, and we looked at, so I've shrunk it down a little bit for you. With Helen, we have done, let's look at Gillian. Well, Gillian's profile was the opposite in terms of shape. So the pattern style was very different. Patience, persistence, goodwill, and self-confidence were the things that that combination produced, with a leadership style of organization and motivation. Communication style was listening and talking. And then we could break out from that all the various aspects that we could glean from the DISC profile. So indicated strengths, service support, specialization, communication, relationships, and loyalty. This lady had been there for 23 years, literally from school. Needs clear directives, which she was not getting. We established that. Autonomy, low C, and predictable environment, high S, with an aspect of people, high I, and the high S as well, being a team. Potential limitations, being high S, resistance in adapting to change, pace of work, meeting tight deadlines, taking risks, low D, not good, trust. And if you've done DISC training, you know that high S's, when they have a problem with someone or feel let down, they can hold a grudge, and that can stay for a very, very long time and feature in their behavior. Motivators, security, being valued, sincere praise, not just a bit of chin music. Ownership of the team and task. That was an important one because they like to own their territory, and avoids insecurity and rejection. When we looked at her major motivators from the PVP, they match, the top two matched the boss, but the profile was different. The only place she was different was in personal development. She felt that we should be personally developing the staff better, spending more time coaching them, and obviously wanted development for herself. And then on the right-hand side, the demotivators, prestige appeared again. So that was one that she didn't really seek. She just sought the opportunity to manage her own team, and she was sharing a team with another person who was doing it differently. Physical challenge and artistic impression were not relevant because it was a psychological challenge to the job. So if we now look at the difference between Helen and Terry, bear in mind that Terry has got the same profile as Gillian, with just one minor difference, and that he's low I. So reflectiveness, concentration, and problem solving was more the things he was interested in as opposed to people. In all other aspects of indicated strengths, needs, limitations, and motivators, he was very, very similar. The thing I draw your attention to is the ownership of the team being high S. That's where the two people had a power struggle. They worked different shifts. One worked the morning, Terry worked the afternoon or the other way around, and then went off to do project management. So their style was very different. Terry was delegating where Gillian was coaching and changing what he had delegated. When we look at the values motivators, we see a very different set for Terry. He wants freedom. He wants autonomy, and he wants the opportunity to create. So he had pretty much a closed door policy. Once he delegated the work for the day in line with the business ethics, he literally shut the door on the people and said, get on with it. And on the right-hand side, physical, cultural identity, artistic impression, not really much we could learn from that other than the fact you probably wouldn't meet Gillian on a jog in the park because they both were low on that particular aspect. So let's look at the difference between Terry and Gillian to see, okay, we want to solve this conflict. We need them to solve the conflict. They've got to do it. So we looked at, again, where they were similar. So the areas in red on their major motivators and their potential demotivators are highlighted. But we can see on the values major motivators, there was no red, that they were very, very different. One was a people manager, the other one was a task delegator and a project, if you like, a project manager. So where were they similar? Bottom left, patterns of behaviour was similar. If we went with DISC, we wouldn't expect to see many changes, except the extroversion. Extrinsic motivators were similar. Extrinsic needs were similar. Indicated leadership style was similar. Where were the differences? People focus. Intrinsic motivators, the energy, where they put their energy, it's about energy, was very, very different. Gillian was in people's jobs order, sitting next to them, coaching them, trying to develop them, where Terry was doing the opposite. Following process, Terry did not follow process. And Gillian set process. Reason for working, Terry worked to use his creativity, his side, his intellectual problem-solving, task delivery, where Gillian worked because she wanted to be with people and communicate with them. So the conflict was communication. They had no meetings. Gillian would send long emails, which was a surprise because she was a low C, and Terry would read them and not respond to them. So she was rejected. Ownership power struggle on the team. Task completion over developing others. One was task complete focused, the other was developing others. So you can look at action-centered leadership and they'd be in different circles. So what did it actually do about it? How did we resolve this? If we move to the final aspect of this particular equation, and what is actually a work in progress as we speak. I checked on it last week. It was quite interesting. They're doing all right. They've identified, I put them into tasks to identify what the problems were, to work out how they could measure the differences between them and align it to the business and engage the people to come back to being one team. The first thing we did was jointly create a supervisory CVP. Not their own way of seeing the job, but okay, what does Johnson Finance want? What are the requirements of the job of a supervisor in Johnson Finance? Then we isolated where they're both in areas of conflict. So we took the personal conflict out. We agreed how and where they needed to compromise. In other words, move towards the center, to each other, but also towards the CVP. Acknowledge where they were similar. So there would be clashes where you're similar and where they might have power struggles, but agree to respect differences because an organization's strength comes from its differences, not from its similarities. That gives us diversity and it gives us adaptability. So where would the differences they have actually create new working strengths and adaptability within the team? Most importantly, that wasn't enough. I said to them, how are you going to monitor and measure progress? How do you know it's going to work and when will you know that you've got to a point of change? So they decided to have a group team meetings every week, and where an email was felt necessary by Gillian, she would pick up the telephone. And if Terry wasn't sure to respond to an email because is it just telling me something or asking me a question? He too could pick up the telephone and say, do you need a response from me on this, or is it just information? Or maybe make that clear in the communication. Most importantly, how to pull the team back together. There were two camps, one for Terry, one for Gillian. How do they deliver transparent and coordinated leadership style to actually get people back together again, working together and combining their working strengths? And I checked with the boss last week with Helen. She said they're about halfway through and really relishing it. But she said it's interesting, they still don't like each other very much, which really wasn't the problem. So that was an interesting case study, which I hope you found of value. If you weren't distrained, my apologies if some of that stuff whistled over the cuckoo's nest, but we can help you with that if that's something you'd like to look at later on. So I think it's pretty much time to thank you very much, and also to invite you to ask any questions. Before you close off, if you need to get away, we have got a slide at the end which just shows you the contact details, if you don't already have them, of the UK team. That's myself, that's Anne, that's Saul and Paul. And also we've got a new webinar. So I think I'll pass this back over to Paul, if you're there, mate, to take us forward from this point on.
Yeah. Everybody hear me okay? I think Anne's unmuted everybody as well, so we're quite happy. We've got a few minutes left before 11 o'clock. If anybody does want any questions or has any questions, we're happy to take them now. The next webinar we're going to be doing is on the, I'll just go back a slide so you can see it. 7th of July, it's a Wednesday. We're experimenting at the moment. We found that the third Wednesday is payroll day for a number of HR people, which has been a little bit of an issue today. So we're moving it to the first Wednesday, which hopefully will be more accommodating for many. And we're going to be looking at exploring the world of remote working. So hopefully that will be of interest and equally very relevant given working from home, etc., and the things that have been happening in the past few year and months. So yeah, thank you very much for coming on today. Hope you found it useful. Again, in terms of our values, it's about generating knowledge and understanding. Hopefully you found it useful. Any questions, feel free in the last 3 or 4 minutes just to fire them. You should be unmuted. I see a couple of people are muted. Chris, you've got your hand up, so if you're unmuted, I think you're free to talk.
I was just saying thank you, and I was actually clapping.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't see it was a clap.
Paul, can I not a question? Can I make a comment?
Mm-hmm, of course.
Kind of interested in you saying about compatibility between, let's say, colleagues. For 26 years, I was a full-time designer, graphic designer. And I'd worked with a number of different clients, from either individuals, one-man businesses or one-woman businesses, to representatives from larger companies. And a few years ago, I did a sort of analysis of my work over that period of time. And one thing I did notice that was all the best work I produced, the most successful jobs, were always for clients that I got on with, that I liked. And the less successful ones were ones where I didn't particularly, there was no kind of rapport necessarily with the client so much. And of course, I would see this as basically, well, you just have to be professional. You're working for somebody, your clients, you just have to be professional. I changed my mind over this really, is that if you don't like somebody, you can't really work with them effectively. There's a sort of barrier there. And that manifested itself very much in a tangible way with the work. When I sorted out the jobs and I looked at the finished projects, all the best work I ever produced over that period of time was always for clients who I actually got on with well, that you built up that rapport almost from an immediate first meeting. You actually like the person. And I'm not saying that I would never have done lesser work for somebody I didn't like, but psychologically, if you like somebody, you work better with them. And of course, you work with a client quite closely over a period of days, weeks, or months, depending on what the job is. And you'd have to work with them because essentially that was your job. You can't, unless of course you sacked your client, which you wouldn't necessarily want to do. But anyway, but interesting what you were saying about compatibility and being able to get on as a team, because you effectively work as a temporary team.
No, definitely, Paddy. I mean, you take me back to one of the stories. I go back 30 years when I was retailing, and I managed probably, well, when I was an area manager, I had about 45 stores. And the flagship store for me and for the company was a shop we had in Meadowhall down in Sheffield, which at the time was the place to be. It was in the country. Meadowhall was the shopping centre. And I was talking to the manager in the front of the store. We were just looking at something, and I made a flippant remark saying, I don't have to like the people that work for me. They just have to do a good job. And she burst into tears in the middle of the shop. She was a high eye. She was somebody who really need. And I said, no, I don't mean that. You know, I don't have to like you. I don't have to come out and socialize with you. She basically said, the team are going out for a drink on the Friday evening. Will I go with them? And I just said I didn't have to like them for them to work for me. And it was a life lesson that I won't repeat, because it was absolute disaster. You imagine a busy retail store in the centre of the biggest shopping centre in the UK, and I've got the manager in tears on the shop floor. So every day is a school day, and I learned a very good lesson that day. That I agree with you, Patrick. I don't think you have to like them, but you either need to be able to modify your behaviour and learn how to accommodate different styles. So there are some individuals that really rub me up the wrong way, and I'm sure there's individuals that rub you up the wrong way. But you know, if they're paying the bills and if you need to work with them, then you can hopefully adapt and modify your behaviour long enough to be able to do what you need to do. But in terms of long term, yes, it is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was a life lesson for me 35 years ago that definitely went against me on that at that moment in time.
Paul, we've had an inquiry about tools and training from Sue. So I've told her that we will get back to her directly. We've got your contact details, Sue.
Definitely.
And if anyone else, I think Paul's going to talk about feedback and contact. If we can have, and you're okay with sharing your emails, then we'll keep you updated. I'm going to stop the recording now. So